All right, can you guys hear me all right? Yes! We made it through the pandemic to another GrowthCon. I am unbelievably excited that we get to actually see humans instead of just Zoomans. I've had all the Zoomy people that I can really handle, I think, from this last year. We're gonna have some fun to get started. I'm gonna kind of just be messing around with some of you guys before I get into my actual speech. So I need a couple of volunteers. Okay, we got one right there. If you don't mind coming up here on stage, and one back there, if you'll come up here on stage. Hopefully you don't regret this. You're like, dang it, I didn't know they were gonna actually do stuff. One of the things that I started developing about 15 years ago is the ability to read people fairly well. Now, it's a little bit difficult with the lights to read y'all out there, but do you want to go first or do you want to go second?
Absolutely. We've met before, though.
Yeah, oh, yeah, I remember. Yeah, that's all right. People will still enjoy it. I'm going to read the faces of our two volunteers here. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Jared McClintock.
Okay, this is Jared. Everybody give him a round of applause. And?
Whitney Bell.
And Whitney, give her a round of applause. All right, so several things on Jared. Ooh, look at that. Do you see those two lines that kind of come together right there? He's very good at taking chaos and turning it into order. So you're probably around a lot of people that are like all over the place and you're always trying to organize things together. When you have two lines between your eyebrows that come together, that is creating order out of this stuff going on. You have a ridge that runs across here, which means that you create rules and systems for the things that you do. They always make sense to you, but they don't necessarily make sense to everybody else.
Well, they make sense.
Oh, okay, good. Flat eyebrows is task before relationship. Cool thing is your right eyebrow is slightly lower, so it kind of tucks under, which means at work you have a tendency to say the things that you're thinking or to filter less of what is between your head and your mouth. You're on the personal side of your life, your ear folds back on the left, so that means that you're kinesthetic, so you process things with intuition and feeling, kind of the way that you're looking at things, and then you're right on the edge on the working side, so you're part visual and part kinesthetic. So it has to feel right, and then you get an image of what the problem is in front of you, and that's how you end up solving it. Your lower eyelids are pretty flat. That means as soon as you meet people, you have an idea of what you think of them. You size them up fairly quick. The squared off chin means that you judge yourself based on goals and accomplishments, and you typically don't like whiny people.
It's pretty close.
Yeah.
That's not bad.
All right. Thank you very much for volunteering. Appreciate you being up here.
Yes,
We're going to be a long line.
Yeah, you're not actually that far off.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy. A lot of times the people who like rules and systems end up being the ones that volunteer. One difference is your forehead tilts back, so you're very quick-witted. I would not want to get into a cut-down contest with you because you would probably win on that. Your ears tilt different than his, so they kind of tilt back like that, which means you're going to see things differently than most of the people around you, which makes you a great problem solver, makes you very creative. You have larger earlobes, which means you need spirituality in your life. Kind of gives you your balance or your center. Your chin is kind of the same. You still have the goals and accomplishments. One of the differences is the septum of your nose, the center point comes down, which means you need a reason why you're doing things. You have to have a mission. You can't work just for money. There has to be a purpose that's behind the things that you're doing. You're actually slightly rounded on the eyebrows, which means you're balanced between task and relationship. So you want to get things done, but you also want to take people along with you in the process of getting them done. Can you wrinkle up like this? Like raise it up there? Okay, so you struggle a little bit in the middle of projects. So you're good on the start and then you seem to always get interrupted in the middle and then you have to get yourself back on track. So that's you.
Perfect.
Awesome, thank you very much, I appreciate it. So when you think about the way that we engage with people, as we're talking about growth and we're talking about bringing out the potential of the people that we work with, you're always reading the people that you interact with. Most of us do it at a subconscious level, and we don't recognize that there was actually anything going on. We just look at them and go, that's who you are. So when you look at the people that are sitting around you, and I know you came with people, but look at some of the people that you don't know, you'll get an idea of what you think of them as soon as you meet them. You may or may not get a warm, fuzzy feeling. I mean, maybe you look at Brad over here and go, bald guys are awesome. You know, or whatever it is that you think about bald guys, or you look down here on the front row and you're like, these are the overachievers because they always sit on the front row. Isn't that right, Gabe? That's how it works. So we have what's called paralanguage, or the way that we present ourselves based on the way that we dress, the way that we walk, the way that we talk, the way that we carry ourselves. And we've been reading those kinds of things our entire life just to learn how to engage with other people. The big struggle that most of us have coming out of this pandemic is we spent so much less time around people, we kind of deconditioned ourselves on what people are actually like. So I'm gonna make you move around a little bit, do a little activity as we get started here. If you don't mind, introduce yourself. You do not have to shake hands. Okay, I know that shaking hands has been off the table for a year, so if you're uncomfortable, you can knuckle bump or you can air high five people. But I want you to introduce yourself and just say what your name is and what some hobby or activity, something fun that you do in your life. Just tell the person that you're meeting that. You don't have to tell them where you work, just your name and something that makes you cool, a hobby that you have or something fun that you do. Go for it. Everybody get up, move around and meet a few people. If you haven't mingled to another person, make sure you meet at least 2 or 3 people. Find somebody that you don't know, introduce yourself. Giving you a 60-second warning. Finish up your intros in about 60 seconds. All right, if you make your way back to your seat. One of the biggest parts of trying to grow, especially when you're in a community like Amarillo or like Lubbock, is trying to figure out how do we connect with other people. Amarillo is one of the friendliest communities that I've ever been to. I have had the opportunity to go to a couple of communities around the world. And what I've noticed about here is that we always seem to want to help one another. One of the aspects that I truly appreciate in figuring out how to grow my own business has been that there's been so many mentors and so many people that reached out to me that said, hey, you're trying this. I really want to help you out however I can. When I first went into business, all the way back in 1999, some of the lessons that I learned very early on were from people who had already been where I wanted to be. So the objective of GrowthCon each year is to bring in some great speakers for you, help you figure out the things that grow you personally and professionally, and help you make it to the next level within your business. So we've got a great lineup for you today. I'm going to be talking about the next generation of leaderships as the first talk, and then Aaron Palacio is going to be talking. Aaron's talked several times. How many of you have been to one of these before? Several of you? Fantastic. Okay, there's a t-shirt. Whoever caught that, I hope you wear a large, because that's what I threw. We only have 2 sizes, so if it wasn't a large, all we have is an extra large. But when you've been to several of these before, you start to recognize that every year we try to do something different for you, try to do something that's going to help you move up a level. Right now, when you look at the world around us, I think the last 18 to 20 months has changed everything for us. There are so many businesses that the conversation that I have with them is, if we could just find people who wanted to work, we would be doing great. Anybody else feel that right now? So a big part of that is culture. We have a few companies that we work with that are fully staffed, but there are a lot of organizations out there that are still really struggling. We kind of put together some themes centered around building great culture and building a reason emotionally for people to want to be a part of your team. So as we go through today, that's kind of the plan. So after Aaron Palacio, we're going to have Adam Beckner. Adam's going to talk about creating a social presence. One of the things that we found out more than anything else is that even if you're just marketing to people so that they would want to go to work for you, people are watching online to see what companies are like, so that they know whether or not they want to be a part of working with you. Damien Boudrea, he is kind of our cool guy from Louisiana. And so Phrase, who is sitting right here, also from Louisiana, sorry, I said that wrong. You'll be able to understand Damien. I think it'll work out good for you. The rest of you, just get your Cajun on, because this guy is funny. He's really fun. He's got a great program on how to build your self-concept and your self-image and how to really push you in the right direction. Then we've got Spanky Astor. Spanky is one of my good friends. He is in the Hall of Fame for auctioneers, but he's going to talk about being an A player and talk about how you position yourself in such a way that your bosses, your coworkers, your customers are always seeking you out, always trying to find a way to connect with you and learn from you. After Spanky, we're going to have Brett Beitlich. Brett is a transplant from Idaho. He was traveling through here about a year ago, stopped to visit for a little bit, and then never left. So he and his family ended up moving here. He is an awesome guy. He is going to talk about being a magnanimous leader. If you don't know what magnanimous is, by the time he finishes, you'll know exactly what that word is. Aristotle talked about it quite a bit, and we're trying to bring some of that coolness back. I do a radio show every Wednesday on KGNZ, 7:30 a.m. It's also streaming 10-2. And I heard Chuck the other day use that. He's like, I'm the magnanimous Chuck. And I'm like, all right, well, there's two people that know that word now. So I love the word. I think it's a cool way to look at the way that we build values and the way that we project ourselves in the right way. Then we'll take a little bit of a break after that, and then I'm going to be speaking, and at the very end, we're going to have a panel. So anybody that bought a VIP ticket, we have an extra session. We also have two drawings if you had a VIP ticket. One of the drawings is for $1,000 worth of coaching, and the other one is for a book package. And so we'll have a couple of those drawings throughout the day. I just want to tell you from the bottom of my heart, thank you for being here. We did a bigger venue so that you could be spread out if you wanted to. That way, nobody felt claustrophobic or too pushed together. I like this venue. It's kind of cool. I grew up in the church. My older brother is here. Wave, Wesley. Wesley is the happy Methodist preacher, meaning he's from Happy. I don't know how happy he is as a person, but happy Methodist preacher. And my dad is a retired Methodist minister. And most recently, was it First Christian that he was at? Yeah, First Christian Church. So he had a Methodist preacher preaching Baptist sermons at a First Christian church, so it was kind of interesting. But I grew up in the church, and so being on stage with a cross behind me seems kind of natural from the things that I experienced growing up in my life. I've never been a preacher, but I've always tried to be passionate about what I do. So as we go through today, if you have questions, write your questions down. At the end of each speech, we'll give you a few minutes that you can ask questions of the speaker. We'll also give you a chance at the end during the VIP session for the panel to ask any of our speakers any questions that you want to. We'll hang out with you, help you any way that we can. During the day, if you will take notes and if you will kind of look at how you can apply this to your life, it will give you the best advantage. There's a theory called the Ebbing house forgetting curve that says within 48 hours, you will forget 50% of what you heard. Within 72 hours, you will forget 75% of what you heard. There's a couple of ways to make that stick a little bit better. When you look at a person's ears, you learn how their learning style is. If your ears fold back, you're a kinesthetic learner, so you learn by doing stuff. Doodling, taking notes, doing things like that help you out tremendously. If you are an auditory learner, you learn by listening. So paying attention and kind of creating an order in your mind helps you. Those are people that have larger ears compared to the size of their head that do not fold back. If you're a visual learner, you're probably going to watch the PowerPoints as we go through the day because you learn by watching things and then imagining the way that you would apply that information in your own life. However you learn, try to focus on what you can take away from this and what you can do to improve your life. Because I've been to hundreds of these seminars throughout my life, through the last 22 years of being an entrepreneur. And one thing I know for sure is that if you go and don't do something with it, then it was a great day, but it didn't make the impact that it could have. So I strongly encourage you, do something with the information at the end. So I'm going to get started on the Next Gen Leader. I didn't really introduce myself, but for those of you who know me, my name is Jody Holland. For those of you who don't know me, my name is still Jody Holland. I have a bachelor's degree in communication and a master's in psychology. I've been in business for the last 22 years. I have had the opportunity to work in 14 countries all over the United States into the deepest regions of Oklahoma and other scary places that are out there. I have written a few books. I've got those out there for sale at any time during the day that you want. And my favorite thing is helping people reach into their psyche and figure out how do they become the kind of leader that everybody else wants to follow. Whether you're leading as a parent or leading as a leader in business, or whether you're leading in sales, you're always leading people in a direction to make them better. So my challenge is going to be to you as you think about how the world is changing, this next generation of leaders that is coming up very, very quickly, they're going to make a huge impact on what your life is going to be. Now, I'm not going to talk about all of the skills that are required to be a next generation leader, because this is actually a 3-day program if we did everything, but we're going to focus on how you lead yourself. Self-discipline is a lost art. Learning to discipline yourself to move in the direction that you actually want to go pushes you to be a standout kind of individual. In the end, I don't believe there's actually any discipline beyond self-discipline. I've also started looking at the way that we are reacting with the cancel culture, and you start to recognize that people can get offended about anything. They can get offended on someone else's behalf just because something that was said kind of bothered them. We hear a lot of people talk about when the movement for positive psychology started, which was in the mid to late 70s and really took hold in the early 90s. A lot of the kids that grew up during that positive psychology movement, they were the ones that were recognized even if they didn't struggle. See, the complaint that I've heard in business for 20 plus years is, oh my gosh, we got to give everybody a trophy. Everybody's got to be recognized. Oh, you showed up today. Oh, I'm so happy. Thank you for doing that, since we pay you to. And you see all these employers, particularly older generations, looking at the younger generation and thinking, why are we having to tell you thank you for doing the things that we were required to do? But you look at that perspective, and it's not always their fault. Everybody was brought up to become who they are. So when we think about leading ourselves, we have to first understand where did we come from, and then we have to second understand what are we going to do about it. Just because you were raised a certain way doesn't mean that you're always going to be that way. You will always have the choice to become whoever you want to be in this life. I love this quote from Aristotle. It says, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. When I started on the journey to figuring out who in the heck I was, I started with some assessments. I started trying to figure out, am I a driven person? Am I a big picture person? Am I task-oriented? Do I like humans? So I looked at all of these various perspectives of who I was as an individual and was trying to figure out, when I take all of the things that I've been through, what's the meaning that I give it? So show of hands really quick. How many of you have siblings, brothers and sisters? There's pretty much everybody in here. That's awesome. Are they exactly like you? A lot of no's out there. They're not exactly like you. They're not exactly like you because even when you grow up side by side with another person, it isn't just the experiences that matter. What ultimately matters is, what meaning did you give to the experience? When you're learning to understand who you are, you have to go back and understand the stories that you told yourself about what life meant when you went through the experiences. Most of us will have 2 or 3 significant experiences before the age of 18 that will shape our reality. Most of us don't even recognize that even if you're in your 40s or 50s, you're still going back and referencing that original experience. There's a part of the brain called the apperception mass. When we perceive something, we try to make sense of it. When we apperceive something, we go through an experience now, but we reference what happened before. The human brain is fascinating. We have the ability to do quick references back to things that happened when we were 5 or 6 years old and still go, oh yeah, all people like this are scary. So if you don't like people with gray in their beard because you didn't like people that were gray in their beard when you were 6, it still impacts you until you recognize why you're feeling the things that you're feeling. So the point I want to make is that what I think Aristotle was helping us get to in an understanding is, it isn't what you went through. It's the meaning that you gave to what you went through that ultimately shapes your reality. We all go through good experiences. We all go through bad experiences. But whatever the experience is, we shape it by telling ourselves a story. When you ask yourself, what are the stories that I've told myself in my life? It takes some real introspection to get to the point of actually understanding what you've done. So as we start with the beginning of who we are, we go through 3 stages of psychological development. And if you want to look this up further, Dr. Morris Massey, Massey, is who I got this from. The beginning of our life, what is known as imprinting, is from 0 to 6 years old. During that first stage, life is happening as you. You have no regard for the feelings of your parents as a 2-year-old. You also don't have conscious processing until somewhere between the ages of 4 and 6 years old, depending on the person and the way that they develop. But during this first stage of psychological development, you are learning the dualities of life, good and bad, right and wrong, and so on. In this first stage, as you move from unconscious processing, life happens as me, towards conscious processing, life is now happening to me, you start to recognize that you don't get to make all your own decisions. Before you move out of life happens as me, 2 years old, or let's go back to 6 months old. 6 months old, you wake up in the middle of the night, you have soiled yourself, okay? You don't sit there and think, mother and father probably would prefer not to be woken right now. You don't do the Family Guy voice. You go, you know what? I'm gonna scream until I get what I want. That is life happening as you. The challenge that we're seeing with a lot of the generational perspectives is that we don't always transition through the different stages of development. The second stage of development, known as modeling, from 7 to 13 years old, this is when you were looking for other people that you wanted to be like. And we would look at the characteristics of other people, and then we would go, oh, when they do X, it makes me think this about them. If you look at a person who is a person of integrity, you don't know that they're a person of integrity because they walk around saying, I am a person of integrity. You know they're a person of integrity because they do things that a person with strong integrity would do. We evaluate the characteristics of people based on the behaviors that they exhibit. When you want to demonstrate certain characteristics, you have to identify those behaviors and then emulate or replicate those behaviors. When you were going from 7 to 13 years old, you were developing your values and your belief systems. And you were doing that in such a way that it would shape the way that you would work. Show of hands, how many of you worked before the age of 14? You had chores that you couldn't get out of, or you had to do stuff where you earned money. That's almost everybody in the room. You'll find in the Panhandle, most people work at a really young age. It's different in different parts of the country, though. A lot of times we don't work until we're 15, 16 years old, maybe even older. There's a lot of people that did not have jobs during this second stage. The third stage of psychological development is known as socialization. This is going to shock some of the ladies in the room. You may not have realized that men do not mature as fast as women. I know, crazy, right? So for women, the prefrontal cortex, the final part of the brain to fully form, grows from 14 to 22 years old, and you learn critical thinking, problem solving, decision making, and accountability. For men, that goes until 26 years old before the prefrontal cortex is fully formed. The fact that my oldest daughter married a guy that's several years older than her probably put them on the same playing field. He might disagree, but I would say it probably put them on the same playing field. But during this stage, learning accountability, a lot of what we're trying to figure out is when we mess things up, we have to be responsible. The human brain is actually wired to rebel. It's wired to push against the values that somebody else told you that you should have and push you into a place where you choose what your values are going to be. So in that third stage of development, we're moving out of life happens to me to life happens by me. If we're moving along the continuum the way that we were supposed to, by this point, we're not letting people push us around. We're not waiting for things to happen in our life. We are taking the bull by the horns and we're going, I'm going to make it happen. But you find if you don't learn accountability, if you don't have to be responsible during that third stage, you don't move into life happens by me. The most successful people have to go through that stage of I'm taking full ownership of myself. No excuses whatsoever for who I am or where I'm going. When we correlate this over, what's kind of interesting to me is that there are 3 different personality assessments that will evaluate who you are and where you're at based on where you were during that stage. So the first stage, that 0 to 6, the Myers-Briggs type indicator or the Big 5 personality test, both of those will give you a clear description of what was developed in you before the age of 7. I'm going to give you a website. I don't make any money off this website, but I'm going to give you this website that I've used. If you want to take every personality test in the world, go to Truity, TRUITY.com. On that site, you can take pretty much all of these for free and get a basic report, or then you can pay for the advanced report, which is about $20. So it's not very expensive. It's a good way to find out on each of these different areas what went on in your life. During that second stage of development, the DISC, which is 4 quadrants: dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness. William Moulton Marston had written a book, The Emotions of Normal People. About 30 years later, Dr. Walter Clark took that book and said, man, that'd make a great test to figure out why people work the way that they work. So we're measuring temperament, which is the portrayal of personality in the workplace. If you look at the Myers-Briggs, that's actual personality. The DISC is now how I'm going to demonstrate who I am based on what my core personality is. The third test, the Enneagram, went past that. I actually love the Enneagram. I was only introduced to taking the Enneagram about a year ago. I'm like, man, that is a clear description of what happened during your teenage years. So this is your action-based approach to life, the way that you would project yourself into the world around you. And the Enneagram and Myers-Briggs and Big 5, both of those on both ends will describe a lot of your personal and professional. The DISC is focused primarily on your professional side of life, but it gives you a picture of who you are based on where you were. And the more you learn about you, the more you understand why you are who you are and why you see the world the way that you do, the more you start to understand the differences. So that first stage, when you're learning right and wrong, good and bad, up and down, all the dualities of life, you start to figure out that you were conditioned to think the way that you think. The only 2 things that are really ingrained in the human brain as far as being afraid of anything are the fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. We are hardwired to recognize softer features and think that those are the people that we want to be around. If you have a nice rounded face, babies will like you more. If you have a really angular face, babies will be a little freaked out when they see you. So doesn't mean you're good or bad, but that's part of the wiring before we know how we're processing the world around us. That second stage, learning to project yourself as a worker, a lot of that's really important because you think about the differences in the generations that we've hired, from boomers to Xers to millennials to Gen Z now. With each subsequent generation, the second and third stages have been the largest variances in the way that kids are raised. That doesn't make kids better, doesn't make kids worse, it makes kids different. What I've seen is pretty much every generation looks at the next younger generation and goes, what in the heck is wrong with them? Even millennials go, if I'm an older millennial, do not associate me with those younger millennials. If you're a younger millennial, like, you people don't understand anything. So every generation has this back and forth. And the Gen Xers are over there like, we don't like anybody. So other than our 80s music, leave us alone. You look at all these generations, you start to see that the world is changing very, very rapidly. That third stage of development, learning to be accountable, will be the basis for what you do in your life. I was exposed to several entrepreneurs early on in life, and I'm pretty sure watching them and watching what they were doing is what made me think, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I want to be in charge of me. And there are days that I wake up and I think, this is the worst idea I've ever had. And there are other days you're like, oh, just make yourself do it. Learning to discipline came from the lessons that you learned when you had to work but didn't want to. That stage of life is happening to you was fantastic for you. We just didn't think so as we were going through it. But in this third stage, as we get held accountable for what we do wrong, life gets easier and easier. Struggle gives us the perspective that we need in order to succeed. But if there are no struggles during our teenage years, we're not equipped to succeed at the same level. So when your parents were mean to you, or like my father, when we moved to the big city of Abilene, Texas, he said, you know what, it's a scary city here. I mean, Abilene is half the size of Amarillo. That is really scary. He goes, you need to be in by 8:30 on weekdays. So I went from I never had a curfew growing up in a small town north of here to I had to be in at 8:30 at night on weekdays just because it was dangerous there. Now, Abilene has 3 Christian universities there. They're not exactly known as a dangerous city to go to, but that was the perspective. You go from a city of 3,000 to a city of 110,000, it seems massive. So his experience growing up played over into the way that he parented me, in the same way that my experience of growing up played over into the way that I parent my kids. When you look at that Myers-Briggs type indicator, which is one of the most popular tests on the market, there are 4 basic quadrants and 16 different categories that you can be. When you understand your personality, you start to understand that, that's why I'm telling myself the stories that I'm telling myself. The basis of your storytelling is the way that your mind is working. What is fun to one person is horrible to another. Any of you heard of David Goggins?
Woo.
Yeah. He's like, I ate nails for breakfast this morning and I got punched in the face 4,000 times. That was just to get ready for the day. He's like intense at all times. He's like, I jog every day, 42 miles uphill. And then he makes fun of anybody that doesn't hurt themselves on a regular basis. I look at that guy and I go, good for you. I'm a little more on the logical side, and we invented these things called cars. So we don't have to run to work anymore. We get to drive. But his personality and my personality are definitely not the same. Your personality is the basis of you telling yourself stories. When you learn storytelling, you're learning to put yourself in a different place. When you look at the disc is one of my favorite ones that I use at work, because if you look at the top portion of that circle, those are all your big picture thinkers. There's dominance people and influence people, and they're just looking at the big picture. Everybody on the bottom of the circle, they're looking for the details, and they tend to be more skeptical about the things that you're doing. And some of my friends from out of town here, I know their boss very well, and I've done assessments on, several people that they work with. And you know which ones are the skeptical ones that tend to not believe anything unless they come up with the idea or they prove it. Everything on the left-hand side over here where it says task, those are the people that want to get the job done. We can have some fun later. Everything on the other side is I want to know the people around me. I want to have some fun with people. Then we can get the work done later. So it's work first or people first, big picture or detail. And you start to understand how you create those variations in order to keep yourself on track. Then you look at the Enneagram. The Enneagram looks like the most complicated thing you've seen. I don't know who drew out the first Enneagram patterns, but it actually looks like this, but then you have little pies that come out in 3D from truity.com and explain who you are. I'm a challenger. That is my number 1 category, and achiever is my number 2. When you look at the perspective of the way that you're going to portray yourself in the world, the reason I think I do executive coaching and the reason I go in and fix problems is because that's what challengers do. You end up doing what you do because it fits these 3 categories of the things that you've been through. So when you think, I chose my career on purpose, the reality is you were conditioned to go towards your career based on the meaning that you gave to all of your experiences through life. So we look at these stages and we look at how we've developed into who we are, and we start to recognize that every generation experienced something different. The baby boomers currently only make up about 13% of the total workforce. If you were born between 1946 and 1964, your generation is retiring at 200,000 people per month right now. We have massively accelerated the retirement, and the pandemic did a lot of that. If you're wondering why we're short on people, it isn't just because young people don't want to go to work. In fact, I don't even think that's the basis of the reason. It's because boomers wake up on a Monday and go, no, I'm done. And that's kind of how retirement seems to work for most baby boomers. They're 100 miles an hour, and then one day they go, I don't actually like any of you people. I want to go hide in the country now, and I don't want to see any more humans. When my father retired the first time, and he's gone back to work part-time a few times after that, but he had called his boss and he said, hey, I just met with my advisor. I asked him when I could retire at 65% of my total pay, and he told me 3 years ago. So I'm gonna give you 6 months. He's driving from Lubbock to Plainview. And he goes about 10 more minutes, calls his boss back. He's like, you know what, I'm not gonna make it 6 months. I'll make it 90 days. And he calls him back 10 minutes later. He's like, I was wrong. End of this month, I'm out. Like, and I'm gonna take 2 weeks vacation in the last 2.5 weeks of this month. That's the way boomers end up retiring. So a big part of the challenge that we're facing right now is boomers are going, I'm good, and I'm out. The Gen Xers are the smallest generation that the world has ever seen. They will never be the majority. They make up roughly 35% of the total workforce. There's only 46 million Gen Xers. Last year during the pandemic, what we started seeing with Generation X is they started shifting their values to go back 2 generations. We stopped working so hard to have 2 income households, and we started going, I think we could live on less. And so you saw a number of Xers back out of the workforce and had only one of the 2 people in the family working instead of both people working in the family. With this generation, their values are the first generation that they said, I don't want work to be the definition of who I am. So they changed the way that they looked at things because baby boomers were the last generation, and every generation before that identified with this one characteristic, I am what I do. But the Xers go, I'm me, and I have cool hobbies, and I do work, and I want to make as much money as I can, as quickly as I can, and I want to leave as soon as I can. And they love their time off. They don't want to work any extra hours if they don't have to. They would rather be rewarded with vacation than a bonus for the most part. Unless they're saving for a Hawaiian vacation, then the bonus is a good idea as well. You look at the next generation, the millennials really are not one generation. Based on values, I would argue that the millennials are broken down into 3 distinctive generations. You have the Xennials, and these are the older millennials that still like really good music from the 80s and have a stronger work ethic than what you would see in youngers. So it's a variation because what they went through about the time they graduated from college was there are no jobs. And they were trying to find a job at a time when we had too many employees. It wasn't that we had lots of opportunity, we had lots of competition. So they actually learned to compete. Then you have what I would call the Millennial Middles. When you look at the middle children of the millennial generation, they're just kind of forgotten and not really defined. They just do their thing. They're very driven. Their parents taught them that they're supposed to move up. They're supposed to make an impact. And then you have the Zennials, which are the younger millennials that start resembling more of what Generation Z is like. Gen Z is about 7% of the total workforce right now. And we look at these 3 generations that are the primary generations, Gen Z, Millennial, and Generation X. You can't look at them and go, well, I don't like the way that they act, so we're gonna avoid them. One of the things that we discovered through our own personal research is all people are born young, and they're not making any more old people. So if you wanna hire people over the age of 40 because you like the way that they work, guess what? Limited pool. What you have to do is learn how to interact and how to develop the potential of young people instead of looking at young people and going, oh, what is wrong with them? There isn't anything wrong with the next generation other than we have to grow up into who we're supposed to be. I look back at the age of 21 for me. I had just graduated college, and I had asked my father-in-law to write a letter of recommendation for me. And he turned it in to the placement office at Angelo State, and they gave me a copy. And they said, I'm not sure if you want to show this to employers. We wanted you to look at it first. They didn't know it was my father-in-law. So I get a copy of the letter. I'm like, immature, but has potential. not the sexiest marketing terminology that you could use. So I didn't use that. And every now and then I give my wife a hard time. I'm like, do I still have potential? Because I know I haven't changed the immature part. I'm just, more follically challenged than what I used to be. So you look at the way that you grow up, none of us were grown up at 21. You get to 21 years old, you're just starting to figure out the world. So you start to learn, how do we understand the shadow self, or the side of ourself that isn't readily known to us? Using those assessments and then having a great mentor, those two characteristics, those two things that you do, to me, have the greatest impact on your ability to succeed. There's two sides of self, according to Dr. Carl Rogers, as well as Dr. Carl Jung. Now, you look at the psychology of us becoming who we are. Rogers was one of the fathers of humanistic psychology. The basic belief that instead of focusing on what's wrong with you, we should focus on what's right with you and what your potential is. When we focus on that side of who you are, we start to develop into what we could be. Until I had people invest time and energy and wisdom in me, I was stuck. But I also believe that from a mindset standpoint, the more I understand about the things that are holding me back, the easier it becomes to actually be successful. Everybody's got bottlenecks. Everybody's got that thing that they're trying to work through, but they need an outside perspective to help them. If you don't have coworkers that you trust, find another mentor. You need somebody in your life that can be direct and can be honest with you to say, here's what you're doing wrong, that can call you out on your bad stories. The shadow self is all of those stories from our childhood that are still there, that we haven't figured out how to deal with and we haven't addressed directly. Your childhood did impact you, but the stories that you told yourself during those experiences are what still have an impact on you. If you want to change things, change the story. I was working with one of my clients yesterday, and we were working through some of the challenges that he was facing, stresses. This last year has been crazy stressful for lots of people. And if you close your eyes for just a minute and you imagine the most stressful event that you've been through in the last 30 days. If you do that right now, just close your eyes, imagine something really, really stressful. You're going to notice what the picture looks like and where the picture sits in your head. When you open your eyes and you go back to it, if you imagine that you had a grid in front of you and you looked at the stressful event, if it was the upper right-hand corner, so it looks like you're looking at it over here, you'll notice it's somewhere in kind of what I would call a 9-point grid. 3, 3, and 3. Some people it's dead center, some people it's off to the side, but you identify where it's at. It'll be either in color or black and white, first person or third person, close or far away, loud or quiet. You're going to have these variations of the way that you experience the stress. One of the easiest things that you can do to start changing your story is like changing the dial on your memory. If it was color, switch it to black and white. If it was loud, make it quiet. If it was close, make it far. So you go through and you mess up the history of that story. What you're doing is you're disconnecting the old story that's been holding you back that lives in that shadow self. Once you can identify ways to let go of the emotional connection to the story, you can become anything that you want to become. But that's what helps you develop your personality continuously. You're not set. Any of this can change if you want to. Whether you want to change your core personality, whether you want to change the way you portray yourself at work, whether you want to change the way that you act and project yourself as you interact with other people, all of those things are adaptable based on what you decide. So when you think about the intelligence that we have, our IQ is our ability to have spatial, verbal, and logical reasoning. 3 components of intelligence. You develop your intelligence throughout your life, and there isn't a point that you stop. But what's more impactful is your emotional intelligence and the way that that's playing into your interactions and your relationships. The first aspect of emotional intelligence is being able to be self-aware. What you believe about you will determine the thoughts that you think, which will determine the actions that you take, which will determine the outcomes that you get. The mistake that we make is we go, I need to try harder. I need more action. But that isn't it. The roadblocks exist in the belief system, not in the action system. So you have to go back and identify, what are my beliefs and can I change them to fit something else? And I've said this a number of times. It wasn't just for the last 2 presidents, but I've been voting every chance I got since I was 18 years old. And one of the things that I have discovered is that anybody can be president. I have discovered that if you push yourself and believe that you are a president, you could be one. If you believe that you're successful, you can be. If you believe that you're a failure, you can be. You can be whatever you want to be, but it begins with the self-concept or the belief about who you are. So think about the story that you're writing about you. Are you writing a story of restriction, or are you writing a story of opportunity? Beliefs create thoughts, thoughts create actions, actions create outcomes. You want to change the story of your life? Change the belief. Everything else changes automatically. When we look at self-regulation, there's 3 basic things that you can do to control your emotional states. In the medial prefrontal cortex, a portion of the prefrontal cortex is designed like a muscle. When you flex that muscle, you can make yourself do the hard things in life. But it's learning to flex the muscle, to be disciplined, and to have the perspective that suffering is not bad. Suffering can be amazing because it gets you where you want to be. So the 3 things that you do, first is your physical presence. So if you don't mind, just turn to your neighbor and show them what angry looks like. Show them your angry face. Some of you apparently don't get very angry. You're kind of laughing out there. Now show them what your happy face looks like. That'll be an easier one. Hey, got your happy face, good, good, good. Now, what do you look like if you're depressed? Like what if physical presence of somebody who's really depressed? What do you do? Good, good, a lot of drooping. What about if you're super happy? You want $100,000 on a scratch off on the way over here? Yes, right? What you notice is all negative emotion goes in, all positive emotion goes out. When you learn to carry yourself with the right physical presence, you stimulate the pharmacy in your brain to produce the right chemicals so that you're happy. The second thing that you do is you tell yourself better stories. If you lose your keys, you don't go, God, I'm such an idiot. Instead, you go, God, I'm gonna really create a system here so that never happens again. Stop yourself in the middle of putting yourself down and change the story. Your self-talk matters greatly. The third thing that you do to make sure that you stay on track is you choose to put good things into your mind. Going to programs like this, reading great books, listening to great books on audio, watching TED Talks, doing things like that positions you to fill your mind with the positive. The more positive you put into your mind, the easier it is to keep the stories going the right way and to carry yourself the way that you should carry yourself. The third component of emotional intelligence is your drive. We look at people and go, man, they're so motivated, or they're so not motivated. We can control that, again, going back to the medial prefrontal cortex, by flexing control and saying, I will act even when I don't feel like acting. And there's 3 P's that you pay attention to. They are purpose, people, and perspective. To stay motivated, you have to have a purpose that is bigger than you. You have to surround yourself with the kind of people that you want to be around, and you have to have the perspective that this too shall pass. Good, bad, or otherwise, everything changes in your life. The 4th component of emotional intelligence is empathy. This one has been a challenge for a lot of people, but this is the ability to see the perspective of another person. Every time I've talked with people who disagree on religion or politics, the 2 bugaboos that we were taught never to talk about, when you have empathy, you seek to understand. You don't seek to prove your point. You seek to understand the other person's perspective. When you're seeking to understand, we tend to not argue, because we're both striving to understand where that person is coming from. In gaining perspective, there's 4 aspects of being a great listener. The first is stop your distractions. You got to focus just on the person that you're with at that time. Our cell phones are the greatest distractors that we have ever invented. It is so easy to do other things instead of being present in the moment. The second thing that you do to be a great listener is you have to respond non-verbally. Don't just stare blankly at a person. Move a little bit when they're talking. The third thing that you do is you ask questions of that person to seek more information or more depth to what they're explaining. And the fourth piece is you feed back what you heard, but you put it in your own words. By doing that, by feeding it back in your own words, you're checking for understanding and making sure that you're on the same page with that person. When we look at these four aspects of being a great listener, those are at the core of being empathetic. When you listen effectively, you automatically become more empathetic as you interact with others. The final piece is social skills. Technology has had a huge impact on the way that we connect and the way that we interact. When cell phones first came out, I thought that is the dumbest thing. Why would you want to carry a phone with you wherever you go? How many have cell phones in here? Everybody or everybody? Good, everybody. I thought they were the dumbest thing. Plus, it was a bag back then. So if you're carrying a great big bag with an antenna sticking off of it, I just looked like the biggest dork trying to carry this around. And then they got smaller and got better and that kind of stuff. And I thought, well, these aren't bad. And then they started texting. I'm like, why don't you just call? And now I can't stand it when people call. I really prefer they just text. And so you start to see that technology impacts our social interactions. I still argue that emojis were invented because we didn't know what emotion was intended in the text message that they just sent. Not to mention that LOL has changed meaning over the years. When my mom lost one of her friends and she sent LOL to her friend, I'm like, no, you did not do that. She goes, why not? That means lots of love. Instead of laughing out loud, luckily her friend was just as old as she was, and she goes, thank you so much. And it wasn't offensive at all. But you look at some of the customs that we have, there's a whole different language that goes with technology. Learning to shake hands, learning to present yourself confidently, learning to interact are the social skills that matter. One of the most sought after skills that I have seen in any business over the last 22 years is the ability for people to just get along. Not to create drama, not to create arguments, not to be an issue for everybody else. The ability to get along is an amazing social skill. If you don't have that skill, come see us afterwards. We can help you with that. But we want people to get along when we go to work. You spend as a leader 5 weeks a year full time dealing with other people's conflict. The average leader spends 200 hours a year dealing with conflict that isn't even their own. Like, sometimes I just want to be mean to people so it's at least my own conflict. But we're always dealing with other people not getting along. These 5 aspects of emotional intelligence put you on a path to be wildly successful, but this will be the basis for the next generation of leaders. When they learn to be emotionally intelligent, everything else tends to work out great. So I hope you guys learned a lot on this. I've been very excited about the next gen leader thing. We started looking at generations in 2001 when people were making fun of my generation and going, man, there's no hope for these Xers. And then they targeted the millennials when we got old enough. And now the millennials are like, these Gen Z kids. And so every generation is going to look at the next generation and go, what is wrong? The only thing that's wrong is we don't intentionally develop the potential of the generation. So that's going to be the challenge I leave you with from this speech is look for the potential in every generation. Thank you, guys. So I'm going to throw a couple of t-shirts out here. Right there. Almost a catch. We'll go over here.